And I'm so thrilled to introduce Jennifer Corriero, who is the Executive Director of Taking It Global and a 1999 Students' Commission of Canada Conference alumni, to talk about what happens after a conference experience and what change you can make as a result of a conference experience. So here's Jennifer.
What incredible presentations, recommendations, ideas, passion, reflections that have come forth this morning. I would like to begin by acknowledging all of the participants and the places that you're from. We are on Indigenous lands. I'm a settler. My grandparents immigrated from Italy when they came. I think the document said they had like $25 in their pocket, and they were deemed enemy aliens to Canada at the time. I live in this area, walking distance, so a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including Mississaugas of the Credit, Treaty 13 territory, also traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat. And when I think about the gathering here of people from many nations, I think about the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and how the values of the Students' Commission and those themes of respect, listening, understanding, and communicating are also embodied, actually, with the values of the Dish with One Spoon, putting the knives down and coming together. And so when I first attended the Students' Commission conference back in 1999, I was a teenager, and so I had to fight really hard to get to that conference. I hadn't traveled for a conference before, and I grew up in the first high school generation where we had to do our mandatory community service hours, but I didn't know where I was going to volunteer. So I applied to a few places, the Courtright Center for Conservation, and I got a spot taking kids on hikes, and I also applied to a gallery, and during the holiday period, I was able to do the craft station, working with children. Eventually, I got a part-time job doing print making support. I was an assistant. My friends had a really hard time getting volunteer placements. It was really hard also as I pursued these placements. I was told by the hiring managers there's very few spots, and they don't really have the capacity to design a good placement for high school students. So I was very concerned because there was this whole new policy for more young people to volunteer, but there weren't really opportunities for that. And this was also, believe it or not, I was part of the generation growing up with the internet. So in 1997 is really when it emerged. I know you all were probably born and everyone knew about the internet, but I was really curious about how we could use the power of the internet for our generation of youth. And actually at the Students' Commission conference, there was a few moments, aha moments that I had, and I wanted to share some of those aha moments, the key ones that stood out for me as hopefully a gift for the next 20 years. So one gift was that we were asked to visualize Canada in 20 years. And keep in mind, this was before 2020, where everyone thought the world was going to end in 2020 because of the computers. So and also that 2020 vision was like everyone had conferences about what was Canada going to be like in 2020. Well, we lived through that. But we were asked, 20 years before, what do you envision for Canada in 20 years from now? So I do want to take a moment and ask you how you will take your ideas, the friendships that you formed, the recommendations that you put forward, not just to the government, but for yourselves, to create the Canada and world you want for 2042. I was challenged to do a time capsule exercise in the conference. So we all made these little time capsules. And then I was to open the time capsule and see if I would live up to my personal commitment to myself. And it really got me thinking about how we need to be so accountable to ourselves, all of us as citizens, across all ages of our lives. Youth is a phase. I ended up doing my undergrad research. I was on a mission to understand how we could create more opportunities for youth. And at that time, I identified as a youth. And I ended up doing my thesis on the role of youth. And in 2005, so this is fast track, so from the Students' Commission, I then opened my time capsule years later, and actually starting Taking It Global, an international organization dedicated to helping youth take their ideas to action. Our motto is inspire, inform, involve. I wanted to create opportunities for every generation of youth to get to run a project. And I basically haven't stopped trying. I just keep going. And the message that I wanted to share was just this little story. So there we fast forward now 2005. So at that time, I was 25. And I found my way just seeking spaces where I could bring, the recommendations that I had when I stood on the podium forward. That was a personal responsibility that I took. So somehow got my way applying to, and there I was in New York at the United Nations World Program of Action 10-year review. So there was a 1995 summit where countries would commit to what they were going to do for youth, and then there was a 10-year review in 2005. I barely went to the bathroom because I didn't want to miss Canada's speech. I sat there for every single speech for like 3 days, and Canada did not give a speech. Nothing. I was furious. I came back, and I didn't publish it. I wrote like a really intense article. I shared it with a few friends. Canada had nothing to say. I was so upset. And I decided what I wanted to do, instead of just write an article about it, I wanted to investigate more. But why did Canada have nothing to say? What is the government of Canada doing to support opportunities for youth? And I was just digging every single department. And then I was seeking meetings, who's supporting youth? And then trying to get meetings with executive directors of foundations. Like, all of a sudden, when you're an alumni of something, you can explain to people that you just attended, like you are becoming alumni of what you have just accomplished in the past few days. You have a platform. You can get access simply through this network. I started asking for meetings with different people. It turned into, someone said, well, what would you do? I said, well, I'd like to go and do a mapping of youth-led initiatives in every province and territory. All of a sudden, months later, I got to submit a proposal, and there it was, a little proposal. So Taking It Global got a project, and we did a mapping project. Then it led to this whole other project, a 3-year program called Creating Local Connections. And we were mapping youth-led and highly youth engaged initiatives. This is between 2006 to 2009. I know we got to have lunch, so I'm going to fast track my story, but I started to mobilize resources for youth to gain access to grants. I was so motivated to do this. And by 2017, that was 15 years in, there were all these grants programs that we were able to run, and then launched the Canada Service Corps. We see their booth here today. And so for the past 5 years, our program cycle has now come to a close in these last few weeks, but over the past 5 years, we have mobilized over $7.8 million in grants given directly to over 7,000 youth in every province and territory, 1,000 being Indigenous-led projects. And that's just me, I'm just one person, nonstop, just keep going. So my message for you is never stop, and if you think there's a limitation, just find another way. I would love, and I talked to Robert Barnard, who you're gonna hear later today. I had a meeting with him last week, and he was one of the people that I looked up to. He was one of the references in my papers back in 1999 about the legitimacy of investing in opportunities for youth to create their own volunteer projects, because there's not enough capacity. We also need to invest more in organizations like the Students' Commission, doing incredible work. Sharif, thank you for your leadership. And so I would love to see every municipality with funding for youth, every province and territory, every First Nations in Canada, every Inuit hamlet, every Métis community, every body, every entity, every nonprofit that has some capacity for youth to apply for funding so they can lead the ideas. We heard so many great ideas today. related to the food guide, related to housing, related to sex education, related to financial education. You all have the ability to help create those resources so we can partner, and you have the power to take your ideas and turn them into action. And 20 years from now, I look forward to the invitation, to the events that you're going to organize and the people that you're going to mobilize to create the Canada we want. Thank you.